There's been a lot happening in the TTRPG community recently. From new games arriving like DC-20 and Daggerheart, to all the news from Wizards of the Coast in the next Dungeons & Dragons edition, there's a lot that I've been excited for, but also a little anxious for. I've been a dungeon master and a player for D&D for a long time, and during the OGL scandal and the playtest for D&D Unearthed Arcana, I had a lot I was worried about with the game direction. I didn't know whether I should still play D&D or if I should switch over to a new system. During this time, there was a lot of uncertainty in my life, and the hobby that I had made a big part of my life, I didn't want to abandon something I've put so much time into. From creating my own setting with my friends and creating content with the world I held so dear, I lost enthusiasm to play. It was really frustrating for a time, as something that used to spark so much joy for me became unmotivating. During this time, I spent a lot of effort creating new content for myself. During a year that had a really rough start, I needed something to focus on. I created my own weapon system that could be ported into D&D 5th edition, adding new weapons and properties that I thought the current game had fell a little short on. This weapon system was finished about 6 months ago now, and I didn't feel like 5th edition was really the best place for it. I have a friend who had made his own games, and we've collaborated a lot over the years. And when I brought up the fact that I was thinking about creating my own content, he urged me to make my own game, and that he'd be super excited to see what I would come up with. So for the past 5 months, I've been creating a passion project under the name of Kindred. I struggled to find an identity for Kindred, as I wanted to implement aspects of D&D, but I didn't want to be a D&D clone. I also dwelled on the idea of making the game broad and pure fantasy so that you can play it in any setting. Both of these had their issues of being generic and too similar to any other TTRPG. It took a few weeks before I decided to have the core rules directly connected to my friends and my setting. Since freshman year of high school, me and my friends had been creating this world using 5th edition, and it grew to be an amazing collaborative project between us. The world slowly grew until we made so much content for it that we started to record all of the content and potentially make a homebrew setting book. The setting was called Halcondra. We created provinces and continents and new classes and races and lore. Halcondra had just enough to create a game from all the world building we had accomplished over the years. Kindred has found a bit of identity, but I didn't know what aspects the game would have. It would obviously have combat and roleplay, as those are a very fun aspect that I heavily enjoy, but there were other aspects that I wanted to play into more as well. I believed that D&D and other TTRPGs were lacking in an interesting traversal system. I love travel in games and wanted to have a section of the game where you can travel long distances. And so I took my favorite board games and video games for inspiration and started collecting ideas to build off of. Right now, the traversal system is a good mix between the board game version of Oregon Trail and the video game For the King, where you traverse a hex grid where there is a starting point and a destination, and while going through it, players can explore the landscape, pulling cards and discovering encounters, potentially gaining items and finding points of interest on the map, letting players potentially prepare for encounters or gamble, potentially having things turn against them. But that's a section that I haven't fully fleshed out. But it also helps differentiate some classes like the Hunter, who can be potentially very good at traversal, but we'll have to see. Refocusing for a second before I get ahead of myself. Like I said before, I've been working on this project for about 5 months now, and I was getting a little restless. I felt like I was in a standstill, like I was making progress, but also making none at the same time. So I made the decision to jump to a different aspect of the game and give myself some hope. I decided to make a character sheet. I had just enough information to know what we needed on the sheet, and also it gave me a different project besides writing. So I jumped on my iPad and opened Procreate and started drawing. First, I laid out the basic structure I wanted with boxes and labels. I knew that I wanted an area for character portrait as well as a similar clean format for character traits, like the Dungeons & Dragons character sheet. Connected to the portrait is the area where you would write down your character name, class, and profession. And to the right of that is a large section for Ancestry, as there's this kind of build your own ancestry or race system implemented to Kindred. There's also room for hit points and stamina, as well as a divided section for different kinds of defense. After that, I made sure to save room for speed, as well as the different things you are trained in. Lastly, there is a section for equipment and pack slots, as well as an area for your weapons. For the portrait section, I wanted to make it feel like you draw your character in a mirror, so I tried some circular versions before eventually settling on a rectangle that I would make pretty later. Another small detail I wanted to add was something implemented in the lore. Gilded on every mirror in Halkandra is the symbol of the celestial icon of beauty, Kaina. I added this as a little Easter egg for me and my friends. I then moved on to the section for your name, class, and profession. I wanted to make this section similar to a piece of parchment, taking some inspiration from one of my favorite illustrators, Tony DiTerlizzi. You can see a lot of this scroll-like parchment in his Spiderwick Chronicles illustrations, and I wanted to fit in this type of styling that initially got me into fantasy settings. As you can see too, I started out in 3 separate sections, but later I decided that being one connected piece looked a lot better. The Ancestry section was a really interesting part for me, as I initially wanted to make it look more family tree looking. I thought the framing on the border of it was nice and old-timey feeling, like it was a family tree illustration you'd see hanging up in your grandparents' house. I ended up pulling back a little bit and started making it more natural with vines and leaves growing out of it to still emulate the family tree idea I started out with. The defense section was also fun to design, as I wanted a sleek and easy to read section with cute icons to match. For the icons, I went with the typical shield for physical defense, a kind of third eye icon for the spiritual or soul defense, and an icon of a silhouetted person with brain powers as the mind defense. These different types of defenses act as a different way of countering spells or other effects, as saving throws kind of don't exist in Kindred. I then went to the character traits, as I made room for their number, skills, and their push dice. This was also when I started adding labels in the font I wanted. For some reason, it reminded me of Dungeon Meshy or Delicious Dungeon, so I'm glad I found that font. This was also around the time when I combined the name section to make it a bit bigger. The next section I created was the area for hit points and stamina. I wanted Kindred to be a pretty low hit point system, taking a small note from Daggerheart and their damage threshold system. This way you don't deal with walls of hit points and super tanky monsters like in DandD, making combat flow a little better in my opinion. We also have stamina points, or just stamina. Stamina helps determine what actions you can take in combat, giving players a variety of choices to choose from. It'll probably be super unlikely to reach any stamina higher than 5, but the option's there if someone wants to play like that. I also take a second to make the section for damage thresholds, but I ended up changing it a little later as I didn't like the shapes I ended up making. I then expanded the defense section to make room for armor and armor aspects, as well as durability. Durability acts as a way of negating some damage, but once all your durability is spent, you can't use them again until you repair your armor. Additionally, armor aspects are a part of armor that gives you certain buffs, making armor a little bit more personal. For example, with some light armors, you can get an aspect called Quick, which gives you a +1 to your movement. I then started formatting where the inventory is. I didn't come up with the idea of inventory or bags until I started making the character sheet. I thought to myself that I really didn't like that types of bags you used don't really have a purpose. So I made it so that different packs can carry different amounts of stuff, and made inventories pretty set in how much you can carry. This might change a bit later, but I liked the idea a lot. And when I brought it up to my friends, they started coming up with different builds to specifically break how much you can hold. An infinite chest glitch would be pretty funny, but who knows if that can even happen. Moving on to the weapon area, I had a similar discovery like I did with the inventory section. I thought that it would be really cool if you can have certain items and weapons ready in a section that isn't your inventory. My friends have compared it to a tool belt or the bottom left-hand corner of Dark Souls and Elden Ring. My thought process was that you can have a primary item, a secondary item, and a ready item. I have a character that dual wields, and I wanted to have a differentiation between his main hand and his offhand too, in case I wanted to switch him over to from 5th edition. This also leaves room to switch weapons, or potentially keep items like potions in your tool belt, so you can drink them without spending stamina. You can see me finishing up the sheet by drawing in the training section and the movement section. I wanted to have a scaling system with things your character can use, like chef's tools and alchemist tools, as well as instruments, so you can potentially get better at using them. So I implemented them with trainings in your skills, your weapons, and other aspects like different tools, as well as languages. I kind of took that language aspect from the Dungeon Coach in DC20. I think it's really good. As I finish up, you can see me moving around some sections and make minor changes. I've been back at school and was able to print the sheets out to have something physical, and seeing it in person lets me see what needs more room or what can be removed or added. So far, I've had so much fun creating this sheet and the contents of this game, and would really appreciate it if you'd come along with me. Hopefully you like it, and leave any comments with questions on the system. I'd be really happy to answer. But besides that, thank you so much for watching. Bye!